Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about the old Victorian house on Blackwood Street. For over a century, the people of this town have kept a secret so profound that wealthy industrialist Thomas Blackwood paid an entire community to bury it beneath floorboards, behind walls, and deep within their guilty consciences. In that basement, something happened in 1895 that would reshape dozens of lives, destroy a family's legacy, and ultimately reveal the most heartbreaking truth about love, sacrifice, and redemption. By the time you reach the end of this story, you'll understand why some secrets are worth keeping and why others must finally see the light of day. This is the story of what really happened in that basement and why the truth matters more than all the money in the world. The envelope. The autumn rain fell like tears against the windows of Miller's Cafe, where Sarah Chen sat with her grandmother's leather journal spread open on the worn wooden table. At 28 years old, Sarah had just inherited her grandmother's estate in the small Pennsylvania town of Millbrook, a place she'd visited only once as a child. The inheritance came with a stipulation that made her stomach twist with curiosity and dread. She had to live in the old Victorian house on Blackwood Street for 1 full year before she could sell it. "More coffee, dear?" asked Martha, the cafe's owner, a woman whose weathered face suggested she'd seen every season this town had to offer at least 70 times over. "Please," Sarah murmured, not looking up from the journal entry dated October 1895. Her grandmother's careful handwriting described something called the arrangement and mentioned payments made to various townspeople, but the entries were frustratingly vague, as if her grandmother had been afraid to write the full truth even in her private journal. Martha set down the coffee cup with a gentle clink. She lingered, her eyes fixed on the journal. "That your grandmother's?" "Yes. Did you know her, Elizabeth Chen?" Martha's expression shifted, something between recognition and discomfort. Everyone knew Elizabeth. She was one of the last ones who remembered. Remembered what? The older woman's lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced around the nearly empty cafe, then slid into the booth across from Sarah. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Your grandmother never told you about the Blackwood House. She died before she could. I only found this journal in her safety deposit box last week." Martha's weathered hands wrapped around her own coffee mug, seeking warmth or perhaps courage. "Some stories aren't meant to be told, dear. Your grandmother understood that. Maybe you should too." But Sarah had never been good at leaving mysteries unsolved. It was what made her an excellent investigative journalist in Boston, and what had cost her more than one relationship when partners complained she cared more about uncovering truths than building a life. Maybe they were right. But as she looked at Martha's troubled face, she felt that familiar pull, the sense that something important lay hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life. "The house has been empty for years," Sarah said. "Why? It's beautiful even if it needs work. Why hasn't anyone bought it?" Martha stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Some questions are better left unasked." She walked away before Sarah could respond, disappearing into the kitchen with a kind of haste that suggested she was fleeing rather than simply returning to work. Sarah closed the journal and looked out at Blackwood Street, visible from the cafe window. The Victorian house loomed at the end of the block, 3 stories of gray stone and dark wood, with a turret on the north corner and windows that reflected the stormy sky like dead eyes. It had been built in 1893 by Thomas Blackwood, a railroad magnate who'd made his fortune connecting coal mines to steel mills across Pennsylvania. The house was an architectural marvel, or so the Historical Society's website claimed, but standing empty as it had for decades, it looked less like a marvel and more like a monument to something gone terribly wrong. Sarah paid her bill, leaving a generous tip that Martha wouldn't look at directly when she returned, and walked the 3 blocks to the house through the rain. The key the lawyer had given her was heavy and old-fashioned, the kind that required actual turning and muscle to work the ancient lock. The door opened with a groan that seemed almost human. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of old wood and older secrets. Furniture sat covered in white sheets like ghosts at a perpetual funeral. Sarah's footsteps echoed on hardwood floors as she walked through rooms frozen in time. The parlor, the dining room with its table set for 12, the library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves still lined with leather-bound volumes. And then, at the back of the house behind the kitchen, she found the door. It was different from the others. Heavier, reinforced with iron bands and secured with not one but 3 separate locks. Sarah's heart began to pound. According to the inventory the lawyer had provided, this should lead to the basement. But why would a basement need 3 locks? She tried the keys on the ring, one after another. None fit. She was about to give up when she remembered the small brass key she'd found in the journal's spine, tucked there like a bookmark. It looked too delicate for such a heavy door, but she tried it anyway. The first lock clicked open, then the second, then the third. The door swung inward, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. Sarah found a light switch, but when she flipped it, nothing happened. The electricity must not have been restored to this part of the house yet. She pulled out her phone and activated the flashlight, then began to descend. The temperature dropped with each step. The stone walls were damp, covered in something that might have been moss or mold. At the bottom, her flashlight beam swept across a large basement room, perhaps 30 feet square. But it wasn't empty. Along the walls stood dozens of wooden crates, each marked with dates: 1895, 1896, 1897, progressing year by year up to 1920. In the center of the room sat a heavy wooden desk, and on that desk lay a leather ledger, remarkably well preserved despite the damp. Sarah approached it with trembling hands. She opened the ledger to the first page. Payments made to ensure silence, read the head. Ing, written in an elegant script. May God forgive what we have done. Below were names and amounts. Sarah recognized some of them from her grandmother's journal, the families who'd lived in Millbrook over a century ago. Next to each name was a sum of money, paid monthly, with meticulous records spanning decades. But paid for what? What silence? She turned the pages, scanning entries, looking for an explanation. The amounts were substantial, enough to change lives in the 1890s. Some families had received payments for 40 years or more, continuing long after Thomas Blackwood's death in 1908. At the back of the ledger, she found a letter, yellowed with age but still legible. It was addressed to whoever finally discovers the truth. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. The paper was brittle, threatening to crumble at her touch. She began to read by the light of her phone. If you are reading this, then the time has come for the truth to be known. I am Thomas Blackwood, and I write this in the year of our Lord 1907, 1 year before my death. What happened in this basement in 1895 was never meant to happen. What I have paid for, all these years, was not silence about a crime, though the town believes that is what I bought. No, what I bought was time. Time for healing, time for growth, time for a miracle to reach fruition away from the cruel judgment of the world. In this basement, my daughter Catherine gave birth to a child. She was 16 years old and unmarried. The father was a young man named Samuel, a worker in my railroad yards, whom she loved with a passion I could not comprehend or accept. In my pride and anger, I forbade their marriage. I sent Samuel away, threatening him and his family with ruin if he ever returned. When I learned Catherine was with child, my first thought was only of the scandal, the shame it would bring upon our family name. I could not see past my own pride to the terror my child must have felt, the love she had lost, the future that seemed destroyed. The child was born here in this basement, attended only by a midwife, in secret and in shame. It was I who demanded it be so. It was I who insisted no one could know. And it was here that Catherine made a choice that I did not understand until years later, a choice that would haunt me for the rest of my days. The child lived. A healthy boy, born on October 31st, 1895. But Catherine, weakened from the ordeal and broken by grief, could not care for him. She looked at me, her father, the man who should have protected her, and she said, "Give him a chance I never had. Give him a life." The midwife, Mrs. Eleanor Hartley, could not have children of her own. Her husband was a good man, a carpenter, honest and kind. I paid them to raise the child as theirs, to love him, to give him the life Catherine wanted for him. And I paid the town, everyone who knew or suspected, to remain silent, not to protect myself but to protect the child from the stigma of his birth, and to protect Catherine from the judgment that would have destroyed her. But the payments bought something else, something I never intended. They bought guilt. They bought complicity. They turned good people into keepers of a secret that grew heavier with each passing year. Catherine never recovered. She withdrew from the world, spending her days in her room, staring out the window at the town that held our secret. She died in 1902, at the age of 23, and with her died my hope for redemption. The boy grew strong and kind. Mrs. Hartley loved him as her own. He never knew the truth of his birth. I watched him from afar, this grandson I could never claim, and I saw in him everything good that I had failed to nurture in myself. He became a teacher, beloved by the children of this town. He married and had children of his own. And he lived as Catherine had wished, free from the burden of knowing what his birth had cost. But I have lived with this burden every day since. The money I paid to the town was meant to give the child freedom, but it imprisoned us all. It turned love into scandal, sacrifice into shame, and redemption into a secret that festered like a wound that would not heal. If you're reading this, then perhaps enough time has passed. Perhaps the world is ready to understand that what happened here was not a crime of passion or a moment of weakness, but an act of love. Complicated, painful, imperfect love, but love nonetheless. The crates along these walls contain Catherine's belongings. Her journals, her letters, her paintings. She was an artist of remarkable talent, but she never showed her work to anyone. It was another casualty of her shame. Perhaps, if you have found this, you will also find a way to let her voice be heard at last. I do not ask for forgiveness. I deserve none. I ask only that the truth be known. Catherine loved her son enough to give him away, and I loved my daughter too late and too poorly to save her from the consequences of my pride. May God have mercy on us all. Thomas Blackwood. Sarah's eyes burned with tears as she lowered He let her. The flashlight beam wavered in her shaking hand. This was the secret. Not a murder or a crime, but a tragedy of love and pride and choices made in fear rather than compassion. She moved to the nearest crate and carefully pried it open. Inside were dozens of journals, their pages filled with words and sketches. She opened one at random and found herself looking at a drawing of extraordinary beauty. A woman holding a baby, her face a mixture of anguish and love so perfectly captured it took Sarah's breath away. On the opposite page, in a young woman's careful handwriting, were the words, October 31st, 1895. I held him for 1 hour to love him with my whole heart, and then I let him go. Samuel, wherever you are, know that he has your eyes. Know that he is beautiful. Know that I will love you both until my last breath. Sarah sat on the cold stone floor and wept. She wept for Catherine, for the child who grew up never knowing his mother's sacrifice, for Samuel who was driven away, for Thomas who understood too late what his pride had cost. She wept for all the people in this town who had carried this secret for generations, the weight of it pressing down on them until it became part of the foundation of Millbrook itself. How long she sat there, she didn't know. But eventually she heard footsteps on the stairs. I wondered how long it would take you to find this place. Martha stood at the bottom of the steps, her silhouette backlit by the light from the kitchen above. Your grandmother found it 40 years ago. She was Eleanor Hartley's granddaughter, the boy who was born here. He was her uncle, though she never knew him as such. He died in World War I, in France, never knowing the truth of his birth. Why didn't she tell anyone? Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from crying. Why keep the secret? Martha descended the rest of the stairs and sat beside Sarah on the cold floor, groaning as her knees protested. She thought about it. For years she thought about it. But everyone who was there in 1895 was dead by the time she found this place. The payments had stopped decades before. The secret had already done its damage. What good would it do, she asked, to dig it all up? Would it honor Catherine's memory? Would it give peace to the boy who'd lived and died never knowing? Or would it just become fodder for gossip and judgment, turning a complicated act of love into a simple scandal? But Catherine was an artist, Sarah said, gesturing to the crates. Her work deserves to be seen. Her story deserves to be told. Does it? Martha's question was gentle but challenging. Or is that what you want because you're a journalist, because secrets bother you, because you think exposure is the same as healing? The words hit Sarah like a slap. That's not fair, isn't it? Martha looked around the basement, her eyes sad. Your grandmother kept this secret for 40 years. When she was dying, she changed her will to leave this house to you. but she didn't include the key to this door. She left that in her journal, knowing you might never find it, or might find it too late. She gave you a choice, Sarah. She gave you what no one gave Catherine, the power to decide for yourself what the right thing to do is, without the weight of someone else's expectations crushing you. Sarah looked at the letter in her hands, at the crates full L of Catherine's hidden life, at the ledger that documented a century of purchased silence. What would you do? I can't answer that, but I can tell you something else. Martha's voice grew softer. The boy, Catherine's son, his name was James. James Hartley. His great-grandson runs the bookstore on Main Street. His name is David. He's a good man, Sarah. He volunteers at the library, coaches Little League, takes care of his aging mother. He's 63 years old, and he has no idea that the blood of Thomas Blackwood runs in his veins, that his great-grandmother gave him away out of love, that his entire existence is built on a foundation of secret payments and silent sacrifices. You're saying telling him would hurt him. I'm saying I don't know, and neither do you, and neither did your grandmother. That's why she left you the choice. Sarah stood, her legs stiff from sitting on the cold floor. She walked around the basement, shining her light on the crates, counting them. 25 in all. 25 crates of Catherine's life, sealed up like a tomb. Can I ask you something? Sarah said finally. Why are you here? How did you know I'd find this place today? Martha smiled sadly. I didn't know. But I've been watching the house for 40 years, ever since your grandmother told me what was down here. She asked me to watch, to wait, to be here if someone ever opened that door. My grandmother received payments too. She was the doctor's wife, one of the ones who knew. That money put my mother through college. It built the cafe that supported my family for 3 generations. We're all complicit, Sarah. We're all bound to this secret in ways we can't escape. The question is, what do we do with that binding? Does it tie us to the past, or does it connect us to something larger? Sarah turned off her phone's flashlight. In the darkness, she could almost feel them. Catherine, Thomas, Eleanor, Samuel, James, all the people whose lives had been shaped by what happened in this basement in 1895. The weight of their stories pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. I need time to think, she said. That's the wisest thing you've said since you arrived, Martha replied. Come on. Let's get out of this place. I'll make you some tea, and we can talk about what your grandmother would have wanted. They climbed the stairs together, and Sarah locked the door behind them, all 3 locks sealing the secret back into the darkness. But as they reached the kitchen, Sarah paused. Martha, what was she like? Catherine? The older woman's eyes grew distant. I never knew her, of course, but my grandmother told me stories. She said Catherine had the saddest smile she'd ever seen, like someone who was always saying goodbye. She said Catherine painted because it was the only way she could speak the truth without words. And she said that on the day Catherine died, she whispered 3 words. Tell him yes. Tell who yes? Tell him what? No one knows. It was never explained. Maybe she was talking to Samuel, wherever his spirit might have been, maybe to God, maybe to her son, giving him permission to be happy without knowing her sacrifice. Or maybe it meant something else entirely, a yes to the question of whether it was all worth it, whether her choice had meaning, whether love, even when it costs everything, is still worth saying yes to. Sarah followed Martha out of the house and back to the cafe, but her mind remained in that basement, circling around Catherine's last words like a moth around a flame. Tell him yes. What question had she been answering? That night Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in a room at the Millbrook Inn, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of Thomas Blackwood's letter. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and walked through the empty streets to the Blackwood House. Using the key, she let herself in and returned to the basement. By the light of a battery-powered lantern she'd purchased at the general store, she began to read Catherine's journals. They were heartbreaking and beautiful, filled with sketches and poems and long passages about her love for Samuel. She described him as gentle and ambitious, a young man who dreamed of studying architecture, who drew buildings in the margins of his work orders, who saw beauty in the curve of a steel beam and the angle of a roof. In an entry dated June 1895, Catherine wrote, Father discovered us together today. not doing anything shameful. We were only talking in the garden, holding hands like children. But Father's face turned purple with rage. He called Samuel terrible names. He threatened to have him arrested on false charges. He said if Samuel ever came near me again, he would destroy not just Samuel but his entire family. I begged Father to let us marry. I told him I loved Samuel with my whole heart. Father slapped me. He has never struck me before. He said I was throwing away my future on a common laborer, that I was too young to understand what love really means. But I am 16, and I know that without Samuel, my life will be empty of meaning. I know that the child I carry beneath my heart is made of our love, and that is the most real thing in my world. Sarah's tears fell onto the page, smudging the century-old ink. She carefully wiped them away and kept reading. The entries from the months of Catherine's pregnancy were increasingly desperate. Thomas locked her in the house, telling the town she was ill. He brought in doctors who confirmed what he wanted them to confirm: a nervous condition, a need for rest and isolation. Catherine wrote about her attempts to contact Samuel, about letters she tried to send that never reached him, about her growing fear that she would never see him again. And then, the entries from late October 1895, October 29. Father says the midwife will come tomorrow. He says the child will be born in the basement, where no one will hear. He says after it is over, we will send the child away, and I will never speak of this again. I asked him where Samuel is, if he knows, if there is any way to find him. Father said Samuel took money and left for California, that he never loved me, that he abandoned me the moment things became difficult. But I don't believe it. Samuel would not leave me. Something has happened to him. I feel it in my bones. Father has done something terrible. October 30. I am in labor. The pain is unbearable, but worse is the knowledge that when this child comes into the world, I will have to give him away. Father says it is for the best. He says the child will have a good life with the Hartleys. He says I am too young, too fragile, that I could not care for a child alone. But I am not alone. I have Samuel. I will always have Samuel, even if Father has driven him away. October 31. My son was born at 3:17 this morning. He is perfect. He has Samuel's eyes and his tiny fingers wrapped around mine with such strength. Mrs. Hartley is kind, but I can see the pity in her eyes, and I hate it. I don't want pity. I want my life back. I want Samuel. I want to raise our child together the way we planned. But Father has taken everything from me, my love, my future, and now my son. In 1 hour, they will take him away. In 1 hour, I will become nothing. I have named him James, after Samuel's father. Father doesn't know. He said the Hartleys would choose the name. But I held my son, and I whispered it to him, James. James Samuel, though that part will never appear on any record. I whispered all the things I want to tell him when he grows up. I told him about Samuel and how we loved each other. I told him about the house Samuel wanted to build for us, with windows that would catch the morning light and a studio where I could paint. I told him that I am giving him away not because I don't love him, but because I love him too much to let him bear the burden of my shame. And then I let him go. Mrs. Hartley took him, wrapped in a blanket I had embroidered with tiny blue birds. She promised to tell him, someday, that his mother loved him. But Father said no. Father said the child must never know. And Mrs. Hartley, who needs the money Father will pay, agreed. So my son will grow up thinking I didn't want him. He will never know that letting him go was the hardest thing I ever did. He will never know that I will love him every day for the rest of my life, from a distance, in secret, in silence. Burst Sarah to stop reading. Her chest ached with sobs she was trying to suppress. She looked around the basement, imagining Catherine here, 16 years old, giving birth in secret and terror, holding her baby for one precious hour before giving him away forever. But there was more to the story. Sarah could feel it. She opened another journal, dated 1896, and found her answer. January 15th, 1896. I have discovered the truth. Father lied about Samuel taking money. Father lied about everything. I went through Father's study while he was at his office and found correspondence with the railroad company. Samuel did not abandon me. Father had him arrested on false charges of theft and sent to prison for 2 years. By the time Samuel is released, it will be too late. I will already be ruined in the eyes of society, and Samuel will believe I forgot about him. Father has destroyed us both, all to protect his precious reputation. When I confronted him with what I had found, he did not deny it. He said he did what was necessary. He said someday I would thank him for saving me from a disastrous marriage. But I will never thank him, I will never forgive him, and I will spend every day of my life mourning what was stolen from me. June 3, 1897. Samuel was released from prison last month. Father's agents have been watching him. They report that he tried to come to Millbrook but was turned away at the town border by men Father paid. Samuel has no idea about the child. Father says it is better this way. But I have made a decision. I have written Samuel a letter telling him everything. I have told him about James, about where he can be found, about the Hartleys who are raising him. I have told him that I still love him, that I never stopped, that if he wants to claim his son and start a new life, I will find a way to join him, no matter what Father does to stop me. I gave the letter to Helen, Father's youngest maid, who has always been kind to me. She promised to see it delivered. Now I wait. I wait for Samuel to come for me, for us to finally be together, for this nightmare to end. The next entry was dated 2 months later, August 12, 1897. Helen is dead. She fell from the 3rd-story window of the house 3 days ago. The sheriff called it an accident, but I know the truth. Father found out about the letter. Father pushed her. And Samuel never received my message. He will never know. He will think I forgot him, that I moved on with my life. And I am trapped here, in this house, in this town, in this life that Father has built around me like a prison. I have tried to die. I have tried 3 times now to end this pain. But Father has guards watching me. He has taken away anything I might use to harm myself. He says I am hysterical, that I need treatment, that he is protecting me from myself. But he is only protecting himself from the truth. He is a murderer, and I am his accomplice because I am too weak to stop him, too afraid to tell anyone what really happened. I am a coward and a failure. Samuel deserved better. James deserves better. And I deserve everything that is happening to me. Sarah's hand shook so violently she had to set down the journal. Helen, the maid, murdered for trying to deliver a letter, and Samuel, somewhere out there, thinking Catherine had abandoned him, never knowing about his son. She pulled out another journal, dated 1900, and Dee found the entries growing shorter, more desperate, filled with darkness. March 3, 1900. I am 21 years old today. I should be married by now, with children of my own that I am allowed to keep. Instead, I am a ghost. I haunt this house like something dead but unable to rest. I watch James from my window when the Hartleys bring him to town. He is 5 years old now. He is happy. He calls Mrs. Hartley Mama, and he laughs when Mr. Hartley tosses him in the air. He is having the childhood I wanted for him, but it breaks my heart every time I see him, because he has Samuel's smile, and he will never know it. September 19, 1901. Father is ill. The doctors say it is his heart. I should feel sorry for him. A daughter should love her father. But when I look at him, lying in his bed, gray and weak, I feel nothing but a deep, cold hatred. He took everything from me. He murdered Helen. He destroyed Samuel's life. He turned my love into a secret so shameful that it must be bought and paid for like a commodity. And even now, as he faces his death, he shows no remorse. He tells me it was all for my own good. He tells me I will understand someday when I have children of my own. But I will never have children of my own. He made sure of that. Who would marry me now? A woman of 22 who rarely leaves her room, who has no friends, no prospects, no future. I am already dead. I am just waiting for my body to realize it. The final journal was dated 1902. Sarah opened it with trembling hands. April 29, 1902. Father recovered from his illness. The doctors call it a miracle. I call it a curse. Now I must endure more years of this prison, more years of silence, more years of watching my son grow up without me. I cannot do it. I cannot bear it one more day. I have tried to paint, to find some solace in my art, but even that has been taken from me. Every canvas I start becomes a portrait of James, of Samuel, of the life I should have had. Father found my paintings and burned them. He said they were evidence of my instability. He said he was protecting me, but he is only protecting himself from the truth of what he has done. Tonight I have made my final decision. Tonight I will finally be free. April 30th, 1902. I am still here. I could not do it. At the last moment I thought of James. I thought of him growing up and someday asking about his birth mother, and I realized that if I die, Father will control that narrative too. He will tell James I was mad or weak or shameful. He will make sure my son never knows that I loved him. So I must live. I must live long enough to find a way to tell James the truth. I must live long enough to make Father pay for what he has done. I may be a ghost, but even ghosts can haunt. But there were only a few more entries. The handwriting grew shaky, the words more sporadic. July 15th, 1902. I am dying. Not by my own hand this time, but by a wasting disease the doctors cannot name. Perhaps it is simply grief taking its physical toll. My body has decided what my mind could not, that it is time to surrender. I am not sorry, but I am afraid. I am afraid that James will never know. I am afraid that Samuel died believing I did not love him. I am afraid that Father will win, that the secret will remain buried, that everything we suffered will have no meaning. I asked Father, in a moment when the pain medication's mad, me bold, if he would tell James the truth after I am gone. He said no. He said the secret dies with me, and I believe him. Father always keeps his word, even when his word is cruel. August 3rd, 1902. Last entry. Father brought a priest today who tried to give me final rites. I refused. How can I confess to a God who allowed this to happen? How can I ask for forgiveness when I am not the one who sinned? I loved Samuel. I love my son. Those are not sins. What Father did, destroying lives to protect his pride, that is sin. Let him confess. Let him beg for forgiveness. As for me, I only want to say one thing before I die, yes. To the question that was never asked but should have been, yes. Would I do it all again, knowing how it would end? Would I choose to love Samuel, to carry his child, to suffer all this pain? Yes. 1,000 times yes. Because that 1 hour I held James was worth every moment of grief that followed. That is the truth Father could never understand. Love is always worth the cost. Always. Tell Samuel yes. Tell James yes. Tell anyone who ever wonders if they should risk their heart, yes. The answer is always yes, even when it breaks you. Especially then. That was the last entry. Catherine died 2 days later, on August 5th, 1902. Sarah closed the journal and sat in silence. The full tragedy of it washed over her in waves. Catherine had died at 23, never knowing if Samuel learned the truth, never able to tell James she loved him. Samuel had spent 2 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and then been driven away from the woman he loved, never knowing he had a son. James had grown up happy, but never knowing his birth mother had sacrificed Eve, writhing for him. And Thomas had lived with the guilt, eventually trying to explain in his letter, but far too late to undo any of the damage. This was the secret. Not just the birth in the basement, but the cascade of destruction that followed. The lies, the manipulation, the murder, the wasted lives. And for what? To protect a reputation that meant nothing to anyone but Thomas Blackwood himself. Sarah understood now why her grandmother had kept the secret. What good would it do to expose all this pain? The people it would hurt were already dead. The people it might vindicate could never know they had been vindicated. It was a tragedy that existed entirely in the past, and dragging it into the present wouldn't heal any wounds, it would only open new ones. But Catherine's art, the journals, the evidence of her talent and her pain, didn't they deserve to be seen? Sarah spent the rest of the night reading through more of the journals and looking through the crates. Catherine's paintings were extraordinary, raw and emotional and technically brilliant. She had real talent, the kind that should have been recognized, celebrated, studied. Instead, it had all been hidden away in this basement, along with Catherine herself. As dawn broke and pale light filtered through the basement windows, Sarah made her decision. She would keep the secret, but she would tell the story, the exhibition. 3 months later, the Millbrook Community Center was packed with people for the opening of an art exhibition titled Unknown Artist, the Catherine Collection. Sarah had spent those months carefully preparing, consulting with art historians, having the paintings restored by professionals, and Most importantly, talking with Martha and other descendants of the families who had received Thomas Blackwood's payments. The exhibition told Catherine's story, but without names. The wall text described a young woman in the 1890s who had fallen in love and gotten pregnant, whose father had forced her to give up her child, who had spent the rest of her short life documenting her pain and love through art. The paintings were displayed chronologically, showing the progression of Catherine's emotional journey. But nowhere did Sarah use the name Catherine Blackwood or Thomas Blackwood, or mention the specific town or families involved. She created a story that was true in every detail except for the identifying information. It was Catherine's truth, but protected by anonymity. David Hartley stood in front of one of the paintings, a portrait of a woman holding a baby, both their faces illuminated by candlelight, the woman's expression a mixture of joy and unbearable sorrow. He didn't know he was looking at his great-great-grandmother and the great-grandfather he'd never known. "It's powerful, isn't it?" Sarah said, approaching him. They'd met several times over the past months. She'd interviewed him about the history of Millbrook for what she told him was a book she was writing. He was a kind man, patient and thoughtful, exactly the kind of person Catherine would have wanted her son to become. "It breaks your heart," David said quietly, "to think of this woman, whoever she was, suffering like this. Do you know what happened to her?" "She died young," Sarah said, "but her son lived a full and happy life. He never knew who his birth mother was, but he was loved by the people who raised him. He became a teacher. He had children and grandchildren." The line continues. David turned to look at her, something shifting in his expression. "Why do I feel like there's more to this story than you're telling?" Sarah met his eyes. He had Samuel's eyes. Catherine had been right about that, because there's always more to every story. But sometimes the most important parts are the ones we carry inside us without even knowing it. The love we inherited from people we never met. The sacrifices made by strangers that shape the course of our lives. The courage it takes to say yes to love, even when the cost is terrible. "That's very poetic," David said with a slight smile. "But you're avoiding my question." Sarah looked back at the painting. "Tell me something, David. If you learned that your family history included a tragedy like this one, something painful and complicated that had been hidden for generations, would you want to know?" He was quiet for a long time, studying the painting. Finally he said, "I don't know. I think it would depend on whether knowing would help me understand something about myself, or whether it would just be painful information with no purpose. My grandmother used to say that the past is like a stone. Sometimes you need to turn it over to see what's underneath. But sometimes it's better to let sleeping stones lie. Your grandmother was a wise woman. She was." David paused. "She also used to tell me that I had eyes that belonged to someone else. I always thought she meant God, or fate, or something philosophical. But looking at this painting, at the man this artist loved, I wonder." Sarah's heart pounded. He was so close to the truth. One word from her and he would know everything. But would that knowledge give him peace or pain? Would it honor Catherine's memory or violate it? "We all carry pieces of people we never met," Sarah said carefully. "That's what family is. That's what love does. It echoes forward through time, even when the original voices are silent." David nodded slowly. "I'm going to bring my mother to see this exhibition. She's 90 years old, and her memory isn't what it used to be, but I think she'd appreciate it. There's something about these paintings that feels familiar, like remembering a dream you never actually had." After David left, Martha joined Sarah in front of the painting. "You handled that well," the older woman said. "Did I? I wanted to tell him so badly. But you didn't. That took strength, or cowardice. I'm still not sure which." Martha was quiet for a moment, then said, "Your grandmother would have been proud of you. You found a way to honor Catherine's art without destroying the peace of the people living now. You told the truth without naming names. That's exactly the kind of wisdom she hoped you'd develop." "But is it enough?" Sarah asked. "Catherine died wanting James to know the truth. I'm keeping him from it, just like Thomas did." "No," Martha said firmly. "Thomas kept the truth out of pride and fear. You're keeping it out of love and wisdom. There's a difference. Catherine wanted James to know she loved him, and she got that, maybe not the way she imagined, but the Hartleys loved him, and he grew up happy, and that love has continued through the generations. David is a good man because he comes from good people. The specific DNA doesn't matter as much as the love that raised him. Over the following weeks, the exhibition became a sensation. Art critics from Philadelphia and New York came to see it. Scholars wrote papers about the anonymous artist's technique and emotional depth. The paintings were featured in art magazines with articles speculating about who the artist might have been. And Sarah carefully deflected every question, protected every secret, and watched as Catherine's art finally received the recognition it deserved, even if Catherine's name remained unknown. But then, one afternoon, an elderly woman came to the exhibition. She walked with a cane and moved slowly through the gallery, pausing for long minutes in front of each painting. When she reached the final painting, Catherine's self-portrait, the last thing she had painted before she died, the woman began to cry. Sarah approached her. "Are you all right? Can I get you anything?" The woman turned, and Sarah saw that she was much older than she'd initially thought, perhaps close to 100. "I know who she is," the woman said softly. "I know who painted these." Sarah's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry, Catherine Blackwood. My grandmother worked as a maid in the Blackwood House. She told me stories about Miss Catherine and her paintings. She said Catherine was the saddest, most beautiful person she ever knew. She said Catherine painted like someone who was trying to tell a truth that words couldn't hold." Sarah's mind raced. "Your grandmother, what was her name?" "Helen Morrison. Though she was Helen Whitaker then, before she married. Helen, the maid who had tried to deliver Catherine's letter to Samuel, the woman who had fallen, or been pushed, from the window." Sarah's voice shook when she spoke. "I thought Helen died in 1897, the elderly woman smiled sadly. "That's what everyone thought. That's what my grandmother wanted everyone to think. But she didn't die. She was badly hurt, yes. Broke both her legs and her back. But she survived. Mr. Blackwood paid for her to be sent to a sanitarium in Philadelphia, where she lived under a different name for the rest of her life. He gave her money, a lot of money, to stay away from Millbrook and never tell anyone what really happened." "What did happen?" The woman looked around the gallery, making sure no one else was close enough to hear. "My grandmother tried to deliver a letter from Catherine to Samuel. Mr. Blackwood found out. He confronted her on the 3rd floor. They argued. He pushed her. She went through the window, but the bushes below broke her fall. She was unconscious and everyone assumed she was dead. When she woke up in the hospital, Mr. Blackwood came to her room. He told her she had 2 choices. She could tell everyone he pushed her, and he would make sure her family was destroyed financially and socially. Or she could take his money, leave town, and never speak of it again. She chose her family's survival over justice. Did the letter reach Samuel? No. Mr. Blackwood burned it in front of her, there in the hospital room. My grandmother said that was worse than the fall, watching Catherine's last hope turn to ash. She lived with the guilt of that for 60 more years. Before she died, she made me promise something. She said if anyone ever found Catherine's paintings, if anyone ever tried to tell her story, I should make sure one thing was known: Samuel never stopped looking for her. Sarah's breath caught. What? The woman reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age. Samuel hired private investigators. He spent 20 years and every penny he made trying to find out what happened to Catherine. By the time he learned she was dead, it was 1925. He was 50 years old and broken by grief. But he had discovered one other thing. He had a son, James Hartley. Samuel wrote him a letter explaining everything. But he never sent it. My grandmother found it among his effects when he died in 1940. Samuel had become a successful architect. Just as he dreamed, he designed buildings all over California. He never married. He never stopped loving Catherine. The woman held out the envelope. This is a copy of that letter. The original is in a bank vault, part of Samuel's estate. I've held on to this copy my whole life, waiting for the right moment to share it. I think that moment is now. I think Catherine's story deserves its ending. With shaking hands, Sarah took the envelope. Inside was a letter in a man's firm handwriting. My dear James, you do not know me, and perhaps you never will, as I am not brave enough to send this letter. But I need to write it, if only to put into words what I have carried in my heart for 25 years. I am your father, not the man who raised you. Mr. Hartley is a good man, and he gave you the life I could not. But I am the man who loved your mother, Catherine Blackwood, with everything in me. I am the man whose child she carried in secret and in shame. I am the man who was sent to prison on false charges to keep me away from her. I am the man who spent 2 years dreaming of the day I could return to her, only to find she had died while I was searching for a way back. I learned of your existence only last year, through an investigator I hired. He discovered the records of payments made by Thomas Blackwood to your adoptive parents, and the truth slowly emerged. You are 29 years old now. You are a teacher, married, with 2 children of your own. You have built a good life, and I have no right to disrupt it with the truth of your origins. But I want you to know that your mother loved you. I want you to know that we plan to marry, to build a life together, to raise you in a home filled with love and light and all the things young people dream of when they are 17, and the whole world seems possible. Your mother's father destroyed those dreams. He sent me away, and he locked Catherine up like a prisoner, and he turned our love into a secret that had to be bought and maintained with money and threats and silence. But here is what Thomas Blackwood could never buy or threaten away. Catherine loved you. She loved you when you were nothing more than hope and possibility. She loved you in the 1 hour she was allowed to hold you. She loved you every day after watching you from windows, seeing you grow into the fine man you have become. And I love you too, though I have never met you, because you are the living proof that what Catherine and I shared was real and true and worth all the suffering that followed. I have designed many buildings in my life. I have put my name on churches and schools and museums. But my greatest creation, the one I am most proud of, is you. You exist because your mother and I dared to love each other despite all the forces arrayed against us. You exist because Catherine was brave enough to bring you into the world and wise enough to give you to people who could love you without fear or shame. You exist because love, real love, is stronger than pride or wealth or social convention. I will never send this letter. I will never disrupt your peace with the complicated truth of your birth, but I needed to write it, to speak across the years to the son I never knew, to tell you that you were wanted, that you were loved, that your existence matters more than you will ever know. Tell your children about love, James. Tell them that it is worth the risk, worth the cost, worth the pain. Tell them that the answer to love is always yes, even when the world says no. With all the love a father can feel for a son he never met. Samuel. Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. The woman beside her was crying too. What do I do with this? Sarah asked. David deserves to know, doesn't he? He deserves to know that his great-great-grandparents loved each other, that their story didn't end in silence and separation. The woman thought for a long moment. That's not my choice to make, and it's not yours either. But I will tell you what my grandmother told me before she died. Some truths set us free and some truths are just burdens we weren't meant to carry. Wisdom is knowing the difference. Sarah looked around the gallery, at Catherine's paintings, at the visitors studying them with admiration and emotion. The art was speaking for Catherine now, telling her truth without names or dates or specifics. People were moved by it. We, refeeling what Catherine felt. The love and grief and sacrifice were communicating across more than a century. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was what Catherine had been trying to say with her art all along. Not this specific thing happened to me, Catherine Blackwood, but this is what love costs. This is what sacrifice means. This is what it feels like to give up everything for someone you love. The universal truth instead of the particular facts. But Sarah thought of David, studying the painting with those eyes that belonged to Samuel, asking if there was more to the story. He had a right to know, didn't he? That evening, Sarah visited Martha at the cafe. She showed her Samuel's letter. Martha read it slowly, then set it down with trembling hands. My God, all these years, and we never knew Samuel loved her until the day he died. What do I do, Martha? Do I tell David? The older woman looked out the window at the Blackwood House, dark against the evening sky. Let me tell you something your grandmother told me once. She said that every generation has to decide for themselves what truths to keep and what truths to share. She carried this secret for 40 years, and she gave you the choice because she trusted you to be wiser than she was. But maybe wisdom isn't about deciding alone. Maybe it's about including the people the secret affects. You think I should? Asked David. I think you should ask yourself if you were in his place, would you want to know, and then act accordingly. Sarah spent a sleepless night wrestling with the decision. By morning, she knew what she had to do. She called David and asked him to meet her at the Blackwood House. When he arrived, she led him to the basement. She hadn't removed anything. The crates were still there, the desk, the ledger, Thomas Blackwood's letter. "David," she said, "I need to tell you something, and before I do, I need you to know that you have a choice. You can hear what I'm about to say, and it will change how you understand your family history. Or you can walk away now, and nothing in your life has to change. But if you choose to hear it, you need to be certain, because once you know, you can't unknow." David looked around the basement, at the crates, at the desk. Something in his expression shifted, recognition maybe, or intuition. "This is about me, isn't it? About my family?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Tell me." So Sarah told him everything. She gave him Thomas Blackwood's letter to read. She showed him Catherine's journals. She shared Samuel's letter that was never sent. She told him about Helen, about the payments, about the secret that had been kept for more than a century. She told him that the paintings in the exhibition were created by his great-great-grandmother, that the love story they depicted was real, that he carried the blood of both Catherine Blackwood and Samuel. When she finished, David sat on the cold stone floor, exactly where Sarah had sat 3 months earlier. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "My whole life, I've felt like I was missing something, like there was a piece of my story that I couldn't quite grasp. My grandmother used to look at me sometimes with such sadness, and I never understood why. Now I do. She knew. She knew all of it, and she never said a word. She was trying to protect you." "From what?" "From knowing I come from people who loved each other. From knowing my great-great-grandmother sacrificed everything so I could exist. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to honor. Your great-great-great-grandfather murdered someone to keep this secret. He destroyed lives. That's part of your history, too." David stood and walked around the basement, his hands trailing over the crates. "We all come from complicated people. We all have ancestors who did terrible things, and ancestors who did beautiful things. Often the same people doing both. What matters is what we do with that knowledge, how we choose to carry it forward. What will you do?" He turned to look at her, and in that moment, Sarah saw all of them in his face. Catherine and Samuel and Thomas and Eleanor and James. The whole tangled web of love and loss and survival. "I'm going to tell my family," David said. "Not the whole town. This doesn't need to be public, but my children and my grandchildren deserve to know where they come from. They deserve to know that their ancestor chose love even when it cost her everything. They deserve to know that Samuel never stopped searching, never stopped caring. Those are the truths worth passing down. And Thomas, the manipulation, the murder, that too, but not as the defining story. Thomas Blackwood was a man who made terrible choices out of pride and fear. He spent the last years of his life trying to atone, and he failed. But he succeeded in one thing. He made sure James was raised by loving people. He made sure the line continued. He tried, in his broken way, to make things right. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it makes him human. And we can learn from that. We can learn that pride destroys, that secrets poison, that the only way to truly love someone is to let them be free, even when it terrifies us. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, the tight knot of responsibility she'd been carrying since the day she found Thomas Blackwood's letter. "You're not angry that I kept this from you for 3 months? You were trying to protect me, just like everyone else in this story. But I think we've all learned that protection can be its own kind of prison. The truth, even when it's painful, is better than silence." He smiled slightly. "Besides, if you'd told me immediately, I wouldn't have had time to see the paintings just as art, without knowing my connection to them. That was important. I needed to fall in love with Catherine's work before I knew she was my family. Now I can see both truths, the universal and the personal." They stood together in the basement for a while longer, surrounded by the physical evidence of a tragedy that had played out more than a century ago. But it didn't feel tragic anymore, Sarah realized. It felt like a story about survival, about love persisting despite impossible odds, about truth eventually finding its way to the light. "What will you do with all this?" David asked, gesturing to the crates. "I'm donating Catherine's paintings to museums, under her real name now. The journals I'll preserve. in a historical archive. And the house? She paused. I think it should be preserved too, as a reminder, not of the secret, but of what happens when we let fear and pride rule our choices, and of what's possible when we choose love instead. The Catherine Blackwood House, David said softly, a museum dedicated to her art and her story. I think she'd like that. I think she'd like knowing that she's finally being seen, not as a scandal or a shame, but as an artist and a woman who loved bravely. 6 months later, the Catherine Blackwood House opened to the public. The basement had been converted into an exhibition space, with Catherine's paintings displayed alongside excerpts from her journals and Samuel's letter. The story was told completely and honestly. The love, the scandal, the secrets, the payments, the tragedy. But it was told with compassion, emphasizing not the shame of it, but the humanity. David spoke at the opening, introducing himself as Catherine's great-great-grandson. He told the assembled crowd about what it meant to discover this history, about the conversations he'd had with his family about love and sacrifice and truth. My great-great-grandmother Catherine was 16 years old when she got pregnant, he said. By our modern standards, she was a child. But she made a choice that required extraordinary courage. She chose to bring her baby into the world, to love him for 1 hour, and then to let him go so he could have a better life than she could give him. That's not scandal. That's love in its purest form. And my great-great-grandfather Samuel spent 20 years searching for her, never knowing she had died, never giving up hope that he could find her again. When he learned the truth, he could have been bitter. Instead, he wrote a letter full of love and forgiveness and hope for the son he never met. These are my ancestors, not the pride or the secrecy or the manipulation that tried to bury their story, but the love, the courage, the choice to say yes to life even when the cost was unbearable. This house stands now not as a monument to shame, but as a testament to the truth that love is always worth the risk, always, and to the truth that secrets don't protect us, they imprison us. It's only when we bring our truths into the light, when we face them with compassion and courage, that we can finally be free. The crowd applauded. Sarah stood in the back, tears streaming down her face, and thought about her grandmother. Elizabeth had carried this secret for 40 years, trying to decide what was right. In the end, she'd given Sarah the choice, trusting her to find a wisdom she couldn't find herself. Maybe that was what love always looked like, trusting the next generation to do better, to see clearer, to carry the story forward in a way that honored both the pain and the hope of it. After the ceremony, Sarah walked through the house one final time before it was officially turned over to the Historical Society. She stood in the bedroom where Catherine had spent her last years, looking out the window at the town below. From here, Catherine would have been able to see the house where the Hartleys lived with James. She would have watched her son play in the yard, walk to school, grow up. Sarah imagined Catherine standing right here, her hand pressed against the glass, loving from a distance because it was the only love she was allowed to give. And she imagined Catherine's relief, her joy, if she could know that more than a century later, her story was finally being told with compassion, that her art was being celebrated, that her sacrifice was being honorable. Ord, tell him yes, Catherine had whispered on her deathbed. Sarah finally understood what she'd meant. Not tell Samuel yes or tell James yes, though those were true too, but tell everyone yes. Tell the world yes, yes to love, yes to truth, yes to courage, yes to bringing secrets into the light, yes to believing that even the most painful stories can have meaning, that even the most broken things can be beautiful, that even the deepest grief can transform into grace. Sarah left the house as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across Blackwood Street. Behind her, the house stood no longer silent, no longer hiding its truth in darkness. The secret of the basement had been revealed, and in revealing it, something had been healed, not just for Catherine or Samuel or James, but for all of them, for David and his family, for the descendants of everyone who'd been paid to stay silent, for the town of Millbrook itself, which could finally acknowledge this chapter of its history without shame, and for Sarah, who had learned something she suspected her grandmother had known all along, that truth and love were the same thing, and that both required the courage to say yes even when the cost was high. As she drove away from Millbrook, back to Boston and her regular life, Sarah thought about the story she would write, not for publication but for herself, a story about the secret basement of 1895, about a young woman who loved too much and a young man who never stopped searching, about a baby born in silence who grew into a man who lived with joy, about generations of people who carried secrets like stones, until someone finally found the courage to set them down. It was a story about many things, but most of all, it was a story about a single word, yes. The word Catherine whispered at the end. The word Samuel wrote in a letter he never sent. The word that echoes through time, passed from one generation to the next, reminding us that love is always worth the risk, that truth is always worth the telling, and that the answer to the question, should I love, is always, always yes, even when it costs everything. Especially then. Some secrets are kept out of shame, but others are kept out of love. The challenge is knowing the difference, and having the courage to bring the truth into the light when the time is